Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling website analytics, specifically for Ruby on Rails applications.
Yeah,
We're kind of setting aside the usual, maybe complex setups and privacy headaches.
exactly. We want to focus on something really interesting. First-party, privacy-minded analytics options.
Right. How you can understand what's actually happening on your website, your traffic, how users are behaving.
Without necessarily leaning on, third-party services or getting into really extensive individual tracking.
So our mission in this deep dive is to get a clearer picture of six Ruby gems that look pretty useful here.
We've got Active Analytics, Ahoy, Impressionist, Wrap Tracker, Legato, and Staccato. 6 gems.
And we're going right to the source, looking at their official GitHub pages.
Yep. The goal is to pull out the core functionalities, understand their angle on privacy, which is key today.
Yeah, and figure out what makes each one unique.
So by the end, you should have a much better grasp of the options available in the Rails world for this kind of first-party analytics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with active analytics. The name itself suggests, well, active analysis.
Right, and the folks behind it, Basecrate, they've put a real emphasis on privacy.
That seems to be the main selling point.
It really is.
Hmm.
The core idea behind active analytics is having first-party traffic analytics living right inside your Rails app.
Okay.
And when they say privacy focus, they really mean it. We're talking NO cookies.
Wow.
No JavaScript running on the client side. No third parties involved.
Okay.
And crucially, NO tracking of specific individual visitors.
So it's purely aggregate data.
Pretty much. And interestingly, because there's no client-side script, it can't be blocked by ad blockers.
Ah, that's a good point.
So if your absolute top priority is zero client-side tracking and aggregate data is enough for you, Active Analytics is a really clear place to start.
So, okay, without all the usual tracking stuff, what information can you actually get?
Well, it focuses on the overall picture. You can see where your traffic's coming from, which pages on your site are popular, which external domains are sending visitors your way.
Referrers, basically.
Exactly. It tracks total page views. And it can give you some idea of user flow by showing the pages users typically visited before and after the current one.
Next, in previous pages. Okay.
Yeah. Plus, you get general stats about browsers and their versions. Just the basics.
Sounds like a solid, if simple, foundation. How do you get it, installed and running?
Getting it set up is pretty much standard Rails procedure. Add the gem to your gem file. Run the migrations it provides.
Creates a table, presumably?
Yep. And then you mount its engine in your routes.rb file, usually under a path like analytics or something.
Makes sense.
There's even an option to simplify a custom base controller if you need to hook it into your existing admin setup, for authentication.
Right, right. Now, how does it actually collect this anonymous traffic data?
2 main ways. The simplest is synchronous recording, meaning in your controllers, you add an after-action hook,
Okay.
and you call activeanalytics.recordRequest. This writes the data straight to your database with every single request.
Every request. Could that be slow?
It could be, yeah. That's the downside. The docs show an example in Application Controller, and they point out you'd probably only want to track HTML responses, right? Not JSON API calls.
Good point.
And they mention you can customize it, maybe only record traffic to your main domain, or use another gem to filter out bots first.
Can you skip certain actions?
Yep, using skip after action, just like any other Rails filter.
Okay, that sounds straightforward for getting started. But you mentioned performance concerns. They have another option.
They do. For busier sites, writing to the DB on every hit might not be ideal, so there's an asynchronous method.
Ah, using a queue.
Exactly. Use Redis. Instead of writing directly, you call activeanalytics.queueRequest, which just pushes the request data onto a Redis queue super fast.
Okay, but you need Redis set up then.
Right. You need Redis available, and you configure the connection, either with a Redis URL or by passing a Redis client instance in an initializer.
So the data sits in Redis.
Ah.
How does it get processed into the analytics view?
You need to periodically flush the queue. There's a method, activeanalytics.flushQueue.
Ah, so you run that with a cron job or something?
Precisely. A cron task or the background job. The docs even suggest running it maybe daily, like right at the end of the day, 23.59.
To make sure the day's stats are complete before midnight. Clever.
Yeah, keeps the daily reports clean.
Now, okay, this analytics dashboard is inside my app. How do I control who sees it? Admin only, presumably.
Yeah, they intentionally leave authentication up to you because every app handles it differently, right?
Sure.
The docs give an example of monkey patching the activeanalytics.application controller.
Okay.
You basically insert your own before action, maybe call it require admin, and check if current us are ahoy.admin or whatever logic you use.
And you need to make sure that patch gets loaded.
Exactly. They mention requiring it in config.application.rb, or if you use devise, they suggest wrapping the engine mount in your routes file within a devise authenticate block. Again, checking for admin privileges.
Good to know it's flexible there. And licensing.
Standard MIT license.
Right.
Very permissive.
Nice.
And yeah, worth remembering, this comes from Basic Correct, the same folks behind the Roveswild monitoring tool.
Okay, good context. Let's move on then. Next up, Ahoy. This one sounds broader, maybe more features.
It definitely seems like it. Ahoy, which comes from Ancan, describes itself as simple but powerful first-party analytics for Rails.
Okay.
It tracks both visits and specific events. And interestingly, it can do this not just from your Ruby code, but also using JavaScript on the front end, and even in native mobile apps.
Whoa, okay, that's a much wider scope than just server-side counting.
Definitely. Wider reach than active analytics.
Where does Ahoy put all this data it collects?
By default, it uses your main application database, just adds its own tables. But it's built to be flexible. You can configure it to use other data stores if you need to, maybe for scaling or specific infrastructure reasons.
What kind of stuff does it capture about a typical website visit?
Quite a bit, actually. It tracks where the traffic came from, the referrer, the landing page.
Standard stuff?
Yep. It can also track location, country, region, city, even last long. But you need to set up geocoding for that.
Ah, okay. Needs another gem like geocoder.
Exactly. It uses the geocoder gem. It also identifies the tech browser, OS, device type, and it automatically picks up UTM parameters from your campaign URLs.
Oh, that's useful for marketing tracking.
Super useful. And you can easily grab info about the current visit using the current visit helper method in your controllers and views.
What if I have, say, an API endpoint? I probably don't want to track visits for every API call.
Right. Ahoy handles that. You can use skip-before-reaction.track Ahoy visit in specific controllers or actions.
Okay.
Or if your whole app is basically an API, you could just set ahoy.api and only true in the config. They also have this interesting feature to defer visit tracking to the JavaScript side.
How does that work?
Well, it can help prevent bots that maybe slip through user agent checks or users with cookies disabled from creating new visits on every single request. You can set it to when needed, so server-side visits only get created if an event needs to be tracked against one, or false to disable server-side visit creation entirely.
Interesting trade-offs there. Now, you mentioned Ahoy tracks events, too. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, events are pretty central. They have a name like clicked by button and then properties, which is just a key value hash for extra context.
It's like the product ID or something.
Exactly. You can track events from your Ruby code using ahoy.track, event name, property.value.
Okay.
There's also an option to automatically track controller actions as events using an after action.
Oh, handy.
And for the front end, ahoy.js gives you a JavaScript function, ahoy.track. Plus, they have libraries for native iOS and Android, and even support for AMP pages.
So you can really connect specific actions like button clicks or form submissions to the overall user visit.
Absolutely. And they have this visitable method you can add to your model, say your order model. This automatically adds an Ahoy visited column and links the order back to the visit it happened during.
So you can then query things like, show me orders that came from Facebook referrals.
Precisely. You can do powerful joins between your application models and the Ahoy visit model to get those kinds of insights.
And how does Ahoy know who the user is? Does it link visits to logged in users?
It tries to, automatically. It looks for current user. If you're using devise, it's even smart enough to associate the user if they log in after the visit already started.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. If you use something else for authentication, you can just call ahoy.authenticate user when they sign in.
And can I easily see all visits for a specific user?
Yep. Just add has many .visits, class name, ahoy, visit to your user model. Standard Rails Association.
Can you customize how it finds the user?
Yes, you can set ahoy.user method in the config if your helper is named something different. And it even has built-in support for Doorkeeper, looking for current resource owner for OAuth 2 setups.
Okay, comprehensive. What about filtering out noise, like bots?
It excludes known bots by default based on their user agent strings.
Can you turn that off? Or add custom rules?
You can turn it off by setting ahoy.trackbots equals true. And yes, you can define your own custom exclusion logic using ahoy.exclude method. You give it a lambda that receives the controller and request, so you can implement whatever rules you need.
Does it track how long people stay? Session duration?
It does. It tracks visit duration, how long before inactivity triggers a new visit. Default is 4 hours, but configurable.
Okay.
And Visitor duration, how long the unique visitor cookie lasts. Default 2 years, also configurable.
Speaking of cookies, always a hot topic. What control do I have there?
Quite a lot, actually. You can set the cookie domain using ahoy.cookie domain at least, all to track across subdomains. You can set other cookie options like secure or HTTP only via ahoy.cookie options. And importantly, you can completely disable cookies.
How?
Just set ahoy.cookies equals none. This is a big deal for things like GDPR compliance if you need explicit consent or want to avoid cookies altogether.
So disabling cookies is an option. What does it use instead then?
It switches to what they call anonymity sets. It groups visitors based on masked IP address and user agent rather than a unique cookie identifier.
Interesting approach for privacy. What about the unique IDs it uses, the tokens?
By default, it generates random UUIDs for visit and visitor tokens. But if you need something specific, you can provide your own custom logic using ahoy.token generator.
Okay. What about preventing abuse, like if someone tries to hammer your analytics endpoints?
Ahoy itself doesn't have built-in throttling, but the docs show a clear example using the rack attack middleware to rate limit requests to the Ahoy API paths.
Good to integrate with existing tools. So let's circle back to privacy and GDPR. What are the key features there?
Okay, so masking IPs with ahoy.maskips. Using those anonymity sets instead of cookies with ahoy.cookies,
Yeah.
none.
Right.
Disabling the automatic linking of visits and users in the data store config.
Right.
And you need to remember to configure ahoy.js too if you're using front-end tracking to disable its cookie usage.
Lots of levers to pull for compliance. What about managing all the data it collects? It could grow quite large.
Yeah, they address data retention. You can delete old visit and event data based on when it started.
Okay.
And they suggest using roll-up processes, basically, aggregating key metrics into summary tables before you delete the raw, detailed records. Helps keep query performance good.
Smart. Can you delete data for a specific user? Like for a right-to-be-forgotten request?
Yes, you can delete all data associated with a specific user ID.
Very important these days. Any tools for developers while they're building stuff?
Yeah, a few handy things. In the browser console, ahoy.reset forces a new visit, ahoy.debug logs info. And in Ruby, setting ahoy.quiet false gives you more verbose output in the Rails console about API requests.
Cool. You said the database is the default store, but it's customizable.
Extremely customizable. You create your own store class, inheriting from ahoy.store or ahoy.base store, and override methods like trackVisit, trackEvent, geocode, authenticate.
So you could send data to Kafka or RabbitMQ or something totally different.
Exactly. The docs even mention examples like that. You can also hook into trackVisit in your custom store to add extra data from the request or controller. And you can even change the underlying model names if you need to.
Wow. Okay, so once you've got all this data flowing into Ahoy, how do you actually use it? How do you explore it?
The docs suggest tools like Blazor for running SQL queries directly against your DB.
Right, if you're comfortable with SQL.
Yeah. And for visualization, they recommend ChartKick and GroupDate, which are popular Rails gems for charts and grouping time-based data.
Okay.
Ahoy itself provides some helper methods on its ahoy.event model. Things like where event to find events by name and properties, where props for specific property values, and group prop to group by a property value.
So you can do some analysis directly through the models.
You can. And it even briefly mentions more advanced stuff like building funnels using those rollups we talked about, and points to other gems like Profit for Forecasting, Anomaly Detection.rb, Breakout for Change Detection, and Disco for recommendations.
It really sounds like Ahoy aims to be a pretty complete analytics suite within Rails.
It really does seem that way.
Yeah.
It even defines an API, so you can generate tokens and post JSON data to Ahoy visits and Ahoy events from other platforms if needed.
Versatile.
Yeah. And they have upgrade notes like mentioning changes in version 5 related to anonymity sets and needing a new index if you disable cookies. It's MIT licensed and used by big names like Instacart, which adds some credibility.
Definitely sounds like a powerful option. Okay, let's shift gears to Impressionist. The name suggests, well, impressions, view counts.
That's exactly it. Impressionist is positioned as a lightweight plugin specifically for logging impressions. You can log them automatically for controller actions or manually trigger them for specific model instances.
What's the main goal here? Why use this instead of, say, Google Analytics?
The doc state its purpose is to give you customizable stats that are immediately accessible right inside your application. It's framed as an alternative to hitting the Google Analytics API just to get basic view counts.
Okay, so quick, in-app stats, does it try to handle bots?
Yes, it mentions it ignores known bots using a predefined list of user agents. Seems like a common feature.
How's the setup process for Impressionist?
Pretty standard gem install.
Yeah.
Add it to the gem file bundle install, run Rails G Impressionist to generate a migration.
And rake dbd.migrate to create the impressions table.
Right, exactly.
What kind of columns does that impressions table have?
It stores quite a bit of context. Impressionable type, impressionable ID to link back to the model being viewed.
Makes sense.
User EID if you have a current or helper available. Controller name, action name. There's a view name field, but the docs say it's a TODO, not actually used yet.
Okay.
It also captures a request to group impressions within a single request. A session hash, the IP address, request params, though it excludes controller action from params.
Good for security, probably.
Yeah. It logs the referrer, an optional message you can add, and standard timestamps.
So how do you actually use it? How do you start logging?
Several ways. The simplest is just putting Impressionist at the top of your controller. That logs an impression for every action in that controller.
Might be too much sometimes.
Right. So you can specify actions. Impressionist.actions.show.index.
Okay, more targeted. What about logging for specific things, like a specific product view?
For that, you first mark your model as impressionable, using an impressionable in the model file.
Got it.
Then, in your controller action, you call Impressionist at widget optional message, passing the model instance. The message is just optional text stored with the impression record.
And the docs mention this is better if you use slugs in URLs.
Yeah, with friendly ID, params.id might be a slug, not the ID. Calling Impressionist on the instance ensures you log against the correct record.
Okay, makes sense. Once you're logging, how do you get the counts back out?
You can call at widget.impressionistCount. By default, this counts unique impressions per request, so one view per request.
Can you filter by date?
Yep, you can pass date range options. You can also filter the count based on .ip address, unique IPs, .params, or .session hash.
What if I want the total count, including multiple views in one request?
Use .filter.all, and you can even filter by that optional .message you stored.
And identifying logged-in users viewing stuff.
Like we said, if a current user method or a current user instance variable is available, it automatically logs the user's ID in the user ID field.
Can Impressionist maintain a count directly on the model itself, like a counter cache?
Yes, it supports that.
Yeah.
Add is impressionable.counterCache true to your model.
Ah, but I need to add the column first, right?
Exactly. You need to add an impressions count column or custom name using .column name to that model's table via migration. Then it will automatically increment it on each unique impression.
What defines unique for the counter cache?
By default, it's unique by IP address, but you can change that using the .unique option, set it to .request hash or even .all if you want the cache to count every single impression.
What if I only want to record an impression if it's unique in some way? Not just for counting, but for logging it at all.
You can control that too. When you call Impressionist in the controller, use the .unique option with an array of column names.
Like
.unique, .impressionable type, .impressionable, .session hash. This would only log a new impression record if that combination hasn't been seen yet in the current request.
flexible. Does it work with databases other than SQL, like MongoDB?
It does mention Mongoid support.
Yeah.
You run the generator with ORM Mongoid and set config.orm.mongoid in the initializer.
So it seems like Impressionist is really focused on getting those view impression stats quickly and easily within the app itself.
Exactly. Less about deep analytics, more about straightforward, accessible impression tracking. It's worth noting, though, the project seems to be looking for new maintainers, according to the read ADM.
Good to know. Stowe MIT licensed, I assume.
Yep, MIT license, and clearly used by quite a few projects.
Okay, let's move to Rack Tracker. This sounds different. It's Rack middleware.
That's right. Rack Tracker takes a different approach. It acts as a central place within your Rack middleware stack to manage the integration of multiple tracking and analytic services.
Ah, so instead of having lots of little snippets or gems for Google Analytics, Facebook Pixel, etc.,
You configure them all through Rack Tracker. The idea is to keep your view partials cleaner and manage everything in one spot. Rack middleware, just to remind everyone, is that layer in Ruby web servers that processes requests and responses.
so its real strength is when you're juggling several third-party trackers.
Precisely. It has the middleware part and then specific handlers for different services. It comes with built-in handlers for a ton of popular platforms, and it helps manage things like do not track compliance across all of them.
That sounds really useful. Does it handle do not track DNT automatically?
Yes. Since version 2.0, it respects the DNT header by default. If DNT is enabled in the user's browser, it just won't inject any tracking code.
Can you override that?
You can, per handler, using a don't respect and flag, but the docs strongly advise against it, naturally. Respect the user's preference.
Makes sense. How do you set Rag Tracker up in Rails?
Add the gem, bundle install. Then, in your config application.rb or an initializer, you use config.middleware.use, rack.tracker do that end. Inside that block, you define the handlers for each service you want, passing their specific config like tracking IDs.
And it works outside Rails too. Sinatra.
Yep. Any rack-based app, you just insert it into the middleware stack appropriately.
What if I need to trigger an event from my backend code, like after a purchase completes on the server?
It provides a tracker helper method for your controllers. Inside a block passed to tracker, you specify the service, example, t.Google Analytics, and the event you want to send, example, send.event data.
So you can do server-side event tracking through it.
Yes, for services that support it. You can send custom events, parameters, custom dimensions, e-commerce data, all triggered from your Ruby code. Things like Google AdWords conversions or pushing to Google Tag Manager's data layer work this way too.
Wow. You said it supports a lot of services. Can you give us a quick rundown of the big ones?
Sure. For Google Global Site Tag, gtag.js, lots of options. Anonymized IP, cookie domain, dynamic user ID, link attribution, display features, custom maps, optimize integration, multiple trackers even.
Okay.
Google Analytics, the older Universal Analytics, has similar options, plus things like site speed sampling, adjusted bounce rate timeouts, enhanced link attribution, advertising features, standard and enhanced e-commerce tracking, optimized support again, control over page view URL, and of course server-side event sending.
Comprehensive for GA.
Definitely. Google AdWords conversion lets you set defaults and trigger conversions server-side. Google Tag Manager needs your container ID, has experimental TurboLink support, and lets you push to the data layer from the server.
What about social media? Facebook.
Facebook Pixel is supported, needs your Pixel ID, allows dynamic configuration per request, and you can track standard events like purchase or custom events from the server using the tracker block.
Others?
Let's see. Visual Website Optimizer, VWO, just needs your account ID. Gosquared needs its tracker ID, supports options like anonymizing IP, setting visitor names and properties. Credio lets you set account, customer ID, site type, email, statically or dynamically, and track events like viewing items or lists.
Keep right.
Xanox needs an account ID, supports their master tag and conversion tracking for lead sales. Hotjar just needs the site ID. Bing needs its tracker ID, supports conversion events. HubSpot needs its site ID. Drift needs its account ID. Heap needs its environment ID.
Phew, that's a lot of built-in support. What if I use something obscure that's not on the list?
It's extensible. You can create your own custom handler class.
How hard is that?
You inherit from rack.tracker.handler. You'd typically override the hashtag render method to output the specific JavaScript or HTML snippet your service needs, probably using ERB or something similar.
Okay.
If you need to modify the response more deeply, you can use hashtag inject. And to enable the tracker syntax in controllers for your custom handler, you define a class method self.track. You can even control where it injects the code, head or body, using self.position.
Seems like a really well-thought-out system for managing all those third-party scripts.
It really does.
Yeah.
Centralizes configuration and D&T handling. The docs do give a standard warning. Be careful about putting unvalidated user input into tracking calls to avoid XSS issues.
Good reminder, license.
MIT license, just like the others.
Okay, finally we have Legato and Staccato. Both seem tied specifically to Google Analytics.
That's right. They serve different purposes, but both target GA Legato is a Ruby client for the Google Analytics APIs, specifically the core reporting and management APIs.
So getting data out of GA.
It's exactly pulling reports, managing settings programmatically. Staccato, on the other hand, is for sending data into Google Analytics from your server-side Ruby code. It uses the measurement protocol, which was part of Universal Analytics.
Got it. Legato pulls data out, Staccato pushes data in. So for Legato, I'd need to authenticate with Google somehow.
Correct. It requires an OAuth2 access token from Google, standard authentication flow. Once you have that token, you create a legato.user object.
And that user object lets me access my accounts.
Yep. You use it to list your GA accounts, web properties, profiles, views. You can then grab a specific profile you want to query against.
How do you actually build the queries in Legato to get, say, page views by browser?
You define models in your Ruby code that extend legato.model. Inside these models, you declare the metrics you want, like page views, sessions, and the dimensions you want to group by, like browser, country.
Okay, define the structure first.
Right. Then you use your profile object to query that model. It returns a Legato query object. When you iterate over that query object, that's when Legato actually makes the API call to Google and gives you the results.
Can you filter the data, like in the GA interface where you can filter reports?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Legato has a pretty neat filtering system. Within your model definition, you use the filter method to create named filters.
What kind of filters?
You can filter based on metric values, Fury-CIGXations 5, or dimension matching, YPG browser or Firefox. You can create filters that take arguments, and you can combine filters using OR logic.
And then you apply these filters to your queries.
Yep, you just chain the filter names onto your query. The docs list all the supported operators, greater than, less than, matches, rejects, contains substring, etc., for both metrics and dimensions.
What about segments? Can you use Google Analytics segments?
Legato lets you define and use session-level segments within your models using the segment method. It uses the same filter expressions you can chain segments to.
Session level only, not user level.
The docs mention it currently focuses on session-level segments, yeah. But you can apply predefined segments from your GA account using the .segmented parameter in your query.
Can Legato do more than just reporting? Can it, like, manage goals or users via the management API?
It can. It provides classes like legato.management.account, web property, profile, and goal.map to the management API objects. So you can list accounts, properties, profiles, and work with goals programmatically.
What other query controls do you have? Start and end dates, limits?
All the standard stuff. Start date, end date, limit for results per page, offset for pagination, sort order, quote also for managing API limits, sampling level, and that segmented we mentioned.
Is there support for the real-time API?
Yes, Google's real-time reporting API lets you see current activity. It's still technically beta with fewer metrics dimensions available. Legato accesses it by calling .realtime on your query or model. Simple enough.
And managing API quotas, Google can be strict there.
Legato helps by letting you assign a quote user or user to your legato.user instance. This gets sent with the API requests and helps Google track usage per user IP, potentially giving you higher limits.
Useful. Anything else notable about Legato?
It has notes for people migrating from an older gem called GARB, highlighting differences in how models, queries, and filters work, and MIT licensed.
Okay, now Staccato. This one sends data to GA from the server using the measurement protocol. How does that work?
You initialize a tracker using staccato.tracker, giving it your GA tracking ID, the UAXXXXXY1. Optionally a client ID and whether to use SSL.
And what kind of data or hits can you send?
Pretty much all the standard measurement protocol hit types. Page view hits with path, hostname, title. General event hits, category, action required, label, value optional.
Okay.
Social hits for tracking shares or likes, needs action network target. Exception hits for logging errors, description fatal flag. Timing hits for measuring server-side execution time.
E-commerce.
Yep. Transaction hits needs transaction ID, and transaction item hits needs matching transaction ID and item name.
So you can basically mirror most front-end tracking, but from the back end. How do you actually send a hit?
Usually just call the method on the tracker, tracker.pageview or tracker.event, passing a hash of parameters. Or for more control, you can use tracker.buildPageView, etc. to get a hit object, maybe add more parameters to it, and then call .track on the object to send it.
Are there options you can set for all hits from a tracker?
Yes. The measurement protocol has global parameters. Things like anonymized ZIP, a user ID, campaign parameters, source, medium term, screen resolution, user language. Staccato lets you set these.
Okay.
The docs list them all. They also note that for page views, specific parameters like path override the global document path if you provide both.
What about custom dimensions and metrics? Can you send those from the server?
Absolutely. You use add custom dimension index value and add custom metric index value on the hit object before sending it. The index matches the slot you configured in GA.
Sometimes you have server events that aren't directly tied to a user interaction, right? Like a background job completing.
Right. For those, you can send a non-interactive hit.
How?
Just add non-interactive. True as an option when you track the hit. This tells GA not to count it towards bounce rate calculations.
Can you control sessions from the server too? Start or end them?
Yes, you can include options like start session, true, or end session.
Yeah.
True when sending a hit, usually a page view, to manage session boundaries in GA. There are other related flags too.
Content experiments,
Yep.
A/B testing.
Supported. You can pass experimented and experiment variant with your hits. You can also set default global parameters right on the staccato.tracker instance itself, so they apply to all hits, unless overridden.
What about enhanced e-commerce? That has really detailed product and transaction tracking.
Staccato supports enhanced e-commerce features fully. It has specific ad measurement methods for things like transaction details, product data, promotion info, checkout steps, checkout options, impression list for product list views, and product impression. Yeah, you need to provide indices for items and lists, and often set a global productation like purchase, refund, checkout, detail, add, remove. The docs have examples for all the common e-commerce flows: purchases, refunds, promotion views clicks, product clicks, checkout steps, impression lists.
Seems very thorough for e-commerce. Anything else? Mobile app tracking.
It supports screen view hits for mobile app tracking too. And throughout the docs, they link directly to the relevant Google Measurement Protocol documentation for deeper dives.
It sounds like Staccato gives you incredibly fine control over server-side GA tracking.
It really does. And it's flexible in how it sends the data too. It uses pluggable adapters.
Meaning?
By default, it uses Ruby's standard FTTP. But you can easily swap in Faraday or even write your own custom adapter.
Any other useful adapters built in?
Yes. There's a validation adapter that sends hits to a GA debug endpoint, great for checking your tracking calls are valid. There's a UDP adapter for use with something called Staccato.proxy, and a simple logger adapter for development that just prints the hit parameters instead of sending them.
That validation adapter sounds super useful for debugging.
Definitely. Oh, and one last cool thing. They show how to use Staccato.acurl with an event hit to generate a tracking pixel URL for email open tracking, including Google's recommended parameters.
Clever. And MIT license, too.
MIT license, yes. Just like all the others we looked at.
Wow. Okay. We have really covered a ton of ground today, from super privacy first, Node.js options, to really comprehensive event tracking, and even direct server-side hooks into Google Analytics.
Yeah, it's clear the Rails ecosystem offers quite a range of choices for first-party analytics. We saw active analytics as the minimalist, privacy uber alles option, no cookies, no JS, just server-side aggregate data.
Right.
That Ahoy, much broader, tracking visits and events across web and mobile, storing data in your DB by default, but very customizable, with lots of GDPR helpers.
Then Impressionist for quick in-app impression counts.
Exactly. And Rack Tracker acting as that central hub, managing multiple third-party trackers and DNT compliance.
And finally, Legato and Staccato for deep programmatic interaction with Google Analytics, pulling data out and pushing data in from the server.
So the key differences really come down to, well, privacy focus, where the data lives, your DB versus external, the scope of tracking, page views versus detailed events, and integration capabilities.
Right. There's no single best one, is there?
Not at all. It completely depends on what you need for your specific Rails app.
Right.
How much you value user privacy versus data granularity, and the kind of insights you're trying to get.
So for you listening, if any of these sounded interesting, the next step is clear. Check out their GitHub repos, read the READMEs thoroughly.
Yeah, that's where you'll find the real implementation details to see if it fits your project's needs and, frankly, your philosophy on tracking.
And it really brings up a final thought, doesn't it, as you weigh these options?
Yeah, how does choosing one of these first-party solutions, especially one that really prioritizes privacy and keeps data in-house, how might that change your relationship with your users? And how does it position you for future privacy regulations?
Something definitely worth considering.